Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want you to think about something that sounds boring and isn't. There is a job in the army where nobody kicks a door. You walk into a town you've never seen, and inside of about 3 weeks you're supposed to know who actually runs it. Not who's on the sign. Not who shakes your hand at the meeting. Who people are afraid of. Who gets paid when nothing seems to happen. The men and women who do that work will tell you the same thing every time. Every place hands you a map, and every place has a second map that's true, and your entire career is the distance between them. Now imagine a man like that comes home. Imagine his own kitchen is a place he never bothered to map, because who maps their own kitchen? And imagine his 7-year-old daughter, 2 days before he flies out for his 4th deployment, sits on the edge of the bathtub with wet hair and tells him that when he leaves, her grandmother puts her in a van, and that if she tells him about it, he will die over there. This story is about what a man does with 60 miles, 10 days of leave, and a skill set that was built for somebody else's country. It's ugly. It's also, I think, one of the smartest things I've ever seen a father do. Stay with me. Bridger Ketterman had a rule about the last week before a deployment, and the rule was that nothing important happened in it. That was not optimism. It was procedure. Everything important got handled in the 4 months before, in the quiet part, when there was still time to fix a mistake. Wills, powers of attorney, the family care plan, the truck battery, the gutters, the dental appointment nobody wanted. He built the last week to be empty on purpose, so that when it arrived, it could be spent doing nothing but sitting on the floor with his daughter, because that was the only thing in the whole process that could not be scheduled early. He was 38, a sergeant first class, and his branch confused people at parties. Civil affairs. When strangers asked what that meant, he usually said, "I talk to people," and let them assume it was something soft. The real answer took longer. His team went into places where somebody had already broken everything, and their job was to find out how the place actually worked underneath the wreckage. Who owned the water? Who decided which family got the flour? Which uncle you had to visit first, or the whole village would go silent on you for a month? He had spent 11 years learning to read a place the way other men read a face. He had also learned, the hard way, that you can be extraordinarily good at reading a village and completely blind at home. That is not a moral failing. It's a targeting problem. You point the instrument outward. Nobody thinks to sweep their own house. The house was outside Tarleton, North Carolina, 40 minutes from Fort Liberty, a low brick ranch with a carport that leaked, and a swing set he had bolted into the clay himself. Inside it lived his wife Darcy and their daughter Emberly, who was 7 and who had been called Ember since the night she was born, because Bridger had looked at her in the hospital and said she looked like something that had been left glowing in a fire and refused to go out. Darcy Ketterman had been a bellnap before she married him. Bridger had liked the bellnaps at first, in the way you like a family that answers the phone and shows up with a casserole. Her mother, Camilla, was the kind of woman other women described as gracious, which Bridger had eventually learned was a word people used when they could not think of anything they actually liked. Camilla wore cardigans in eggshell and cream. She kept a laminated card in her purse with the phone numbers of every family readiness contact on post. She ran a small nonprofit out of a strip mall office in Tarleton called Homefront Bridge, which existed, according to its own brochure, to walk beside military families through the seasons of separation. That brochure was on the refrigerator. It had been on the refrigerator for 4 years. Bridger had looked at it maybe 900 times and read it exactly 0. Camilla had been very useful during the last 3 deployments. That was the phrase Darcy used. Very useful. She drove Ember to school when Darcy picked up shifts. She took Ember on Saturdays. She had a key. When the family care plan got updated in March, Camilla's name went on it as the secondary caregiver, with the authority to consent to routine medical treatment in the event that both parents were unavailable, and Bridger had signed it in a room with 40 other soldiers signing the same form and a staff sergeant saying "next" every 90 seconds, and he had not read that either. He would think about that later more than he thought about almost anything. Darcy worked as a scheduler at an orthopedic practice off Highway 24. She had a laugh that used to arrive before the joke landed, and somewhere in the last 2 years it had stopped doing that. Bridger had noticed. He had filed it under deployment strain, which is a folder where a lot of true things go to be ignored. She had started keeping her phone face down. She had started saying, "My mother handles that," about a widening list of subjects. She had bought a used Acura in January with cash, and when he asked, she said her mother had helped, and he had said that was nice of her, because what else do you say? Bridger's own family was small and blunt. His parents were both dead. His sister Holland was an athletic trainer at the high school in Tarleton, 6 years younger, and she had a way of looking at Darcy across a table that Bridger had told her, more than once, to knock off. "I don't say anything," Holland had said at Thanksgiving. "You say it with your entire head," Bridger said. "Then stop watching my head." So the last week arrived, and it was supposed to be empty. Monday he took Ember to the aquarium in Fayetteville, and she named a nurse shark Gary. Tuesday, they made a cake that came out of the oven concave, and she wanted to eat it anyway, out of the middle, with 2 forks. He was leaving Friday. Wednesday night, he was kneeling on the bathroom floor with a towel over his shoulder, working a comb through the back of her hair, and she was sitting on the lip of the tub swinging her heels, and she was quiet in a way that had a shape to it. He knew that shape. He had sat across from a lot of people who had something they wanted to say and were doing arithmetic about the cost of saying it. Village elders, interpreters, a shopkeeper in a market town who had known for 6 weeks which house the mortars were coming from and had needed 9 cups of tea to get there. You do not push. Pushing is how you get the version they think you want. So he combed her hair and talked about nothing. He told her the shark was probably not really named Gary. He told her about a man in his unit who could not whistle and had been trying for 11 years. And Ember said, "Daddy, when you go, does Grandma still get to come get me?" "Sure," he said. "She helps Mom out." "Why?" Ember looked at the drain. "Because when you're gone," she said, "she puts me in the van." Bridger's hands did not stop moving. That is a thing you can train. His hands kept working through a snarl above her ear, and his voice stayed exactly where it had been. "What van, Bug?" "The white one. There's no windows in the back part. There's a bench and it's cold and Bishop sits by the door." She said the name like Bridger should already know it. "We go really far, longer than church. We go until the trees get tall, and then there's a big gray building, and we do the visit, and then we come back, and we get cookout on the way home, and I'm not supposed to say." "Who's Bishop?" "He's a grown-up. He counts us when we get on." "Us." Bridger set the comb on the edge of the sink because he had noticed his thumb pressing hard enough into it to leave a line, and that was the kind of thing children read instantly. "How many of you are there?" "Sometimes 7. One time there was 10, but 2 throwed up." "Okay," he said. "Okay, and what happens at the visit?" "They put a bracelet on you, and it has your number, and you can't take it off till the end. They do the tape thing on your arm." She pointed at the crook of her elbow. "And Miss Tilly does mine because she's the only one who does it good. And you have to breathe into the tube for the count of 6, and they take your picture standing on the tape line. And then there's the room with the beanbags and the tablets, and it's actually fun in there. And then you go home. Bug, look at me for a second." She looked at him. She had Darcy's eyes and his stubborn chin. "Has anybody ever hurt you there? Has anybody touched you anywhere they shouldn't?" "No," she said, with the flat honesty of a 7-year-old who has been told about that specific thing by 3 different adults and finds it boring. "It's just doctor stuff. It's just really long." "Then why aren't you supposed to say?" And there it was. She got very still. Her heels stopped swinging. She looked at the drain again, and her chin went crooked, and Bridger watched a 7-year-old carry something too heavy across a bathroom floor. "Because Grandma says if I tell you," Ember said, "you'll die over there." The house made its ordinary noises. The dryer thumping in the hall, water in the pipes somewhere, down the road a dog. "She said that to you?" Ember nodded fast, and it broke open all at once. She said soldiers die when they're worrying about home instead of watching. She said Uncle Emerson's friend died because his wife told him a bad thing on the phone, and then he wasn't watching and it happened. She said if I told you about the van, you'd be thinking about me instead of looking, and then somebody would shoot you, and it would be because of what I said. She had both fists on the edge of the tub. So I didn't say, for a really long time. "But you're leaving on Friday, and I keep having the dream." "What dream?" "The one where I tell you at the airport and you're already dead." Bridger Ketterman had been handed the location of a weapons cache by a 14-year-old with a nosebleed. He had been told by a mayor, in a room full of that mayor's cousins, exactly which of them was skimming the fuel. He had trained himself to receive a thing without letting his face change, because his face changing had, in one specific instance, gotten a man killed. He put his arms around his daughter and held the back of her head and told her she had done the exactly right thing, the bravest thing, and that nothing she said could ever get him hurt, and that nobody who loved her would ever tell her that talking was dangerous. Over her shoulder, at the towel rack, his eyes had gone flat and still. Because a woman who tells a child that speaking will kill her father is not a woman who is embarrassed about something. Embarrassment produces a different lie. That lie was engineered. It was load-bearing. Somebody had thought about the specific psychology of a 7-year-old with a deploying parent and had built a device out of it, and the device had held for at least a year. You do not build a device like that to hide a doctor's appointment. He got her into pajamas. He read 2 chapters instead of 1. He sat on the floor of the hallway outside her door for 11 minutes after she fell asleep with his back against the wall and his hands loose on his knees, and he did the only thing he actually knew how to do. He started building the true map. Darcy was in the kitchen with a glass of wine and the small blue light of her phone. "She down?" Darcy asked. "Out cold." Bridger got a glass of water he didn't want and stood at the sink with his back to the room because the sink faced a window, and the window at night is a mirror, and you can watch a person's whole face in a window while they think you're looking at the yard. "Hey," he said, "so I'm gonna feel dumb asking this. The medical stuff for Ember while I'm gone, is that all through the clinic on post, or is your mom taking her somewhere?" In the black glass, Darcy's face did something very fast. It was not confusion. Confusion is slow, and it comes with a frown. What crossed Darcy Ketterman's face was the expression of a person who has been handed a question they have rehearsed an answer for and did not expect tonight. "Post-clinic," she said. "Why?" "No reason. Just want to make sure the paperwork's clean before I go." "It's clean." She took a drink. "Mom handles it." "She's a lifesaver," Bridger said. He drank his water. In the window, his wife looked at the back of his head for 4 full seconds before she went back to her phone. That was the moment the deployment ended. Bridger was still going to fly. Somebody named Ketterman was still going to be on that manifest. But 60 seconds after his daughter told him a white van took her past the tall trees, and about 4 seconds after his wife's face moved in a window, Sergeant First Class Bridger Ketterman had already stopped being a man who was leaving. He went out to the carport at 11:30 with a flashlight and a legal pad, on the excuse of checking the truck's brake fluid, and he sat on an overturned bucket and drew a line down the middle of a page. On the left, he wrote what he had been told. On the right, he wrote what was true. It was the first page of a notebook he would fill completely in 19 days, and it started with 3 things on the right-hand side, and all 3 of them were sentences a father should never have to write. A white van with no windows in the back, a man called Bishop who counts the children as they board, and at least 7 kids, at least one of whom is mine. There is a version of that night where Bridger Ketterman kicks in Camilla Belknap's front door at 1 in the morning. He sat on the bucket in the carport and ran the loud plan all the way to the end, because that is what you do with it. You watch it fail in your head instead of in the world. Here is how it failed. He shows up. He shouts. Camilla is gracious and frightened and calls the sheriff. Darcy says he's been unstable since the last rotation. Somebody puts the word PTSD in a report, and the word does what it always does, which is convert every true thing a man says afterward into a symptom. He flies out Friday anyway, because the Army does not care about his weekend, and the white van goes quiet for a month, and then starts again with a different child in Ember's seat. And Ember learns for the rest of her life that when she finally told the truth, the sky fell on her family. The loud response gives your enemy an exit. He had written that sentence in an after-action review once, and a captain had cut it because it sounded like a fortune cookie. It was still true. So he did the quiet thing, which is the harder thing. And the first problem was that he was supposed to get on an airplane in 34 hours. He drove onto post at 05:30 Thursday and found First Sergeant Niles Easton in the company office with a cup of coffee and the specific gray face of a man doing manifests. Easton had been a squad leader when Bridger was a specialist. There was no version of the relationship where either of them lied to the other. "I need to not be on Friday's bird," Bridger said. Easton put the coffee down. "Okay." "I need to be on the follow-on chalk, 19 days out, and I need the 10 days of leave I never took, starting tomorrow morning." "Okay," Easton said again, and then, because he was not a stupid man, "Is somebody dying?" "No." "Is somebody about to?" Bridger looked at him for a while. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the problem." Easton got up and shut the door, which in that office was a whole paragraph. Then he sat down and pulled the roster up on the screen and started typing. This is the part people get wrong when they hear the phrase, "He faked his flight manifest." So let's be precise, because the precision matters later in a courtroom. Bridger Ketterman did not forge a government document. What he did was worse for the people it happened to and completely legal. He asked his first sergeant to move him from the advance party to the main body, which is a request that gets granted 40 times a rotation for reasons as small as a wisdom tooth, and then he took the leave he was owed and told his family absolutely nothing. The manifest with his name on it for Friday got amended at 07:10 Thursday morning by an administrative specialist named Rena Ferraro, who did it in 90 seconds and thought about it never. And the copy of the old manifest, the one with Friday's date and his name and a seat number, was still sitting on the corkboard in the hallway of the Ketterman house, where Darcy had pinned it in March. "Ketterman," Easton said, "if this is a domestic thing, and you go do something stupid, I will personally." "It's not a domestic thing." Bridger leaned forward. "My daughter told me a man counts her onto a van. She used the word us, plural. I need 19 days, and I need my family to believe I'm in another country." Easton looked at him a long moment. Then he wrote something on a sticky note and slid it across the desk. It said, 0600 daily. Text me a period. Just a period. If I don't get it by 0700, I make phone calls. "That's not negotiable," Easton said. "That's fine." Friday morning went exactly the way it was supposed to. Darcy drove. Camilla came, because Camilla always came to the airport, because Camilla was gracious. She wore a cardigan in the color of milk. Ember sat in her booster seat in the back next to Bridger's carry-on with her arms around his forearm the whole way, and she did not say one word about vans, and Bridger understood that she had decided the telling was over, and now the only job was that he came home. At the curb, Camilla hugged him. She smelled like the inside of a department store. "We'll take good care of your girls," she said. "You just watch out for yourself over there." "I always do," Bridger said. "Head on a swivel," said Camilla Belknap, and patted his chest twice. He got down on one knee, and Ember put her forehead against his forehead, which was their thing, and he said what he always said, which was, "Who's the toughest?" And she said, "Me." And he said, "Who's second?" And she said, "You," and it was normally funny. He walked into the terminal with a duffel on his shoulder. He went through the doors, turned right past the airline counters, walked the length of the concourse level arrivals hall, and came out the other side at the rental car counter, 11 minutes later. He rented a gray Chevy Malibu, the single most invisible object in North America, and drove it 45 minutes east to a motel outside Tarleton, with exterior doors and a parking lot you could see from the road. Then he called Holland. "You're supposed to be over the Atlantic," his sister said. "I need your truck. Not today. Sunday. And I need you to not tell one person on this planet, including your husband, and I need you to not ask me a question until Tuesday." There was a long pause on the line. "Is it Darcy?" Holland said. It was not a question, and there was something old and tired in it. "Tuesday," Bridger said. "Bridge. Tuesday." She dropped the truck at the motel Sunday morning with a bag of groceries in the passenger seat that he had not asked for, and she left without knocking, and that was one of the reasons he loved her. Saturday, at 08:47, Bridger Ketterman was parked 300 meters down the road from his own house in a rented gray Malibu with a pair of binoculars in his lap and a paper notebook on the passenger seat. He had not slept much. He had spent Friday night doing the least glamorous and most important thing in his entire trade, which is writing down what you already know and being honest about how thin it is. 2 pages of facts, 11 pages of assumptions, clearly labeled as assumptions. A page of questions in order of how much each answer would change everything else. Question 1. Does the van come when I'm gone, or was Ember describing something from 6 months ago? He had his answer at 0902. A white Ford Transit came down the road from the direction of town. No windows behind the front seats. Clean, recent, unremarkable. A plumber's van, a florist's van, 10,000 of them within an hour of here. On the side, a magnetic sign in a soft blue serif, Homefront Bridge, Family Services, and underneath in smaller letters, Walking beside military families. It pulled into his driveway, over the oil spot his truck made, and Camilla Belknap got out of the driver's seat in a cardigan the color of oatmeal. Bridger watched his mother-in-law walk up the steps of his house and open his front door with her own key. 4 minutes later, she came out holding Emberly's hand. Ember had her backpack, the purple one with the frayed strap. Darcy stood in the doorway in scrubs and waved and shut the door before the van had finished backing out. Ember climbed in the side door. Bridger, 300 meters away, saw for 1.5 seconds into the back of that van, and what he saw was a bench seat along one wall and 2 other children already sitting on it, and a man in the front passenger seat turned around with a clipboard. Big shoulders, ball cap. He said something and pointed with the pen, twice, counting. Bishop counts us when we get on. Bridger let them get 400 meters up the road before he pulled out. He had been trained to follow vehicles in places where a white face in a sedan was the most conspicuous object for 100 kilometers. Following a van through rural Cumberland County was, technically, easy. It was also the hardest 60 miles of his life, because for the first 15 of them his hands would not stop wanting to do something else. Twice he came up close enough to read the plate and had to make himself fall back. Once, at a light in a little crossroads town, the van stopped, and the side door slid open, and a woman brought a boy of about 9 out of a duplex and put him in, and Bridger sat 4 cars back, with both hands on the wheel, and his jaw locked, and did nothing, and it took everything he had ever learned about anything. They went east and then north, out of the county, off the 4-lane onto a state road, then off the state road onto county blacktop, with grass in the seams. The land went from tobacco flat to rolling. Then the pines started. Ossipee National Forest is not the kind of forest people think of when they hear national forest. It's not a postcard. It's 160,000 acres of loblolly pine and hardwood draws and gravel logging spurs, cut through with old inholdings, private parcels that were grandfathered in when the boundary was drawn, farms and quarries and a couple of industrial sites that the government never bought back. There are roads in there that Google has never driven. 61 miles from Bridger's driveway, the van turned right onto Sardis Gap Road, and the tall trees closed over the top of it like a hand. He did not follow it in. That was the discipline. A gray Malibu on a gravel road in a national forest at 10 in the morning behind a van full of children is not surveillance, it's an announcement. He drove past the turn at 55 without slowing, went 2 more miles, pulled off at a hunter's gate, and got out. Then he walked. It took him 50 minutes on a compass bearing through pine litter and greenbrier, in blue jeans and a t-shirt with a rental car key in his pocket. And when the ground rose and the canopy thinned, he lay down on his stomach in the needles at the top of a low ridge and put the binoculars up. Below him, in a cleared parcel of maybe 11 acres ringed by a chain-link fence with a coated gate, sat a long, low building of gray corrugated steel. Cold storage originally. 2 loading docks on the near end, converted, sealed. A gravel lot. A newer prefab annex stuck onto the south side with a proper glass door and a wheelchair ramp and a small landscaped bed of monkey grass, which was somehow the most horrifying detail of the entire morning, because nobody plants monkey grass at a place they intend to abandon. And in the lot, Bridger counted vans. Not one van. He counted them twice, because the first count is always wrong. 9 white transits, backed in a neat row. There were people moving between the vehicles and the annex door, 2 women in wine-colored scrubs, a man in a white coat with a tablet, a folding table under a pop-up canopy with a cooler on it and paper cups. And there were children walking in a loose line toward the glass door, holding the hands of adults in scrubs, a couple of them carrying stuffed animals. One boy in a Panthers jersey dragging his feet the way children drag their feet at the doctor. Bridger lay in the pine needles and made himself count them. It took 4 minutes because they kept moving. 31 children. And above the glass door of the annex, mounted level and square, professionally printed, weather-resistant, with a small blue logo of a stylized compass, was a sign. North Rail Clinical Partners Site 14, Sardis Gap visitors must sign in. That was the moment the shape of the thing changed under him. Because a man who drives children into a forest in an unmarked van does not put up a sign. A sign is the single most expensive thing you can do if you're hiding. A sign means permits. A sign means a lease. A sign means an entity with a name that files taxes and buys insurance and has a website with a stock photo of a lab on it. Bridger had spent 11 years learning what it means when the ugly thing has letterhead. It does not mean you were wrong. It means the ugly thing has already solved the problem you were about to be its first person to notice. He photographed the sign, the gate, the vans, the plates, the annex, and the tree line, and then he lay very still in the pine needles for another 2 hours and 11 minutes, until at 13:48, the children came back out to the vans in a loose line, and every single one of them had a paper bracelet on their wrist, and one of them, the small one in the green shirt near the back with a purple backpack, was his. Bridger got back to the motel at 6:30, with pine sap on his forearms and a phone full of photographs, and he did the thing that separates people who solve problems from people who have feelings about them. He took a shower, ate a whole rotisserie chicken standing over the sink, and then he sat down with a legal pad and did not touch the internet for 90 minutes, because the internet is where you go to have your first theory confirmed, and your first theory is always wrong. He wrote down only what he had actually seen. 9 vans, 31 children, wine-colored scrubs, a white coat, paper wristbands, a converted cold storage building on an inholding, a sign with a corporate name and a site number, which meant there were at least 13 other sites somewhere. And then he wrote the sentence that reorganized the whole thing. Nobody there was scared. Fear has a signature. People glance at the road. Somebody gets assigned to the tree line whether they know it or not. Everyone moves a half step faster than the task requires. At Sardis Gap, a woman in scrubs had stood in the gravel lot for 6 minutes drinking coffee out of a paper cup, one hip against a van, scrolling her phone. They weren't scared because they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. Or, the colder version, the one he wrote underneath and circled, because they knew that what they were doing was, on paper, entirely permitted. Then he opened the laptop. North Rail Clinical Partners was a contract research organization headquartered in Charlotte. It did not develop drugs. It ran the trials for the companies that did, recruited the subjects, ran the visits, collected the data, handed the data to the sponsor, and it got paid per subject enrolled and per subject completed. Under leadership there were 4 faces. The one that mattered was Dr. Sebastian Vaught, MD, PhD, Chief Medical Officer and Principal Investigator, a man of about 60, with silver hair and rimless glasses, and the particular unbothered smile of somebody who has never once had to explain himself to a person who could hurt him. Bridger found the trial in about 40 minutes, in the Federal Registry where every clinical study in the country is supposed to be listed, because it is listed, because that is the entire point. A Phase 3, multi-center, randomized, double-blind study to evaluate the efficacy and safety of ARD-114 inhalation solution in pediatric subjects aged 4 to 11 years with moderate persistent asthma. Sponsor, Ardenwell Therapeutics. Estimated enrollment, 640. Sites, 14. Site 14, Sardis Gap, North Carolina. Recruiting. Ember did not have asthma. Bridger sat and looked at that for a long time. Then he went and got the second thing. He drove to his own house at 2 in the morning, parked on the next street, walked in through his own back door with his own key, and stood in his own kitchen in the dark, listening to his wife breathe through a wall. It was the single strangest 90 seconds of his life. He did not go down the hall. He went to the desk in the corner of the dining room where Darcy kept the household folder, photographed every page of it with his phone on the lowest brightness setting, and left. At 3:40 a.m., in a motel room off Highway 24, Bridger Ketterman found his daughter's name on a consent form. Parental Permission and Authorization, Protocol ARD 114-3, 22 pages. Subject initials EK, subject ID 14-0022. And on page 22, in the box marked Signature of Parent.Legal Guardian, in the handwriting he had watched write grocery lists for 9 years, Darcy A. Ketterman, dated the 14th of February. Under it, a second signature line, Person Obtaining Consent, signed C. Belknap, Study Coordinator. And under that, a third box he had to read 4 times before it went in. Subject screening, history of moderate persistent asthma, documented, minimum 12 months, checked yes. Attached, a 1-page pulmonary note on the letterhead of a pediatric practice in Tarleton, signed by Barnett Hatterley, MD, describing a child with a 2-year history of nocturnal wheeze and albuterol dependence, and a documented FEV1 of 68% predicted. Emberly Ketterman had run a 100-yard dash at her school field day in April, and come in second. The lie was not in the van, the lie was in the file, and the file was, in every legal sense that would matter to a police officer, a judge, or a reporter, a real medical document, executed with a real signature, by a real parent, with real legal authority, at a real registered clinical trial site, with a sign over the door. That is what Bridger meant later, when he said the worst thing about Sardis Gap wasn't that it was hidden, it's that it wasn't. He filled 6 pages that night with the true map, and it looked, when he was done, exactly like the maps he had drawn of villages. At the top, he put Camilla Belknap, and next to her he wrote Study Coordinator, and he made himself sit with how good that was. Camilla did not need to trick her way into military families. She was the person the Army handed them to. Homefront Bridge had a table at every family readiness event on Fort Liberty, and a listing in the post-welcome packet. In 4 years it had walked beside, that phrase again, something like 900 families across 3 counties, and it had every one of their phone numbers, deployment dates, children's ages, and spouses' work schedules in a database Camilla had built herself with a grant. To find a family with a deployed parent, a stressed-out remaining parent working shifts, a grandparent already on the family care plan with medical consent authority, and a child in the 4 to 11 age bracket, Camilla Belknap did not have to hunt. She had a list. The Army had made it for her. Below her, Bridger drew a line to Emerson Belknap, Darcy's older brother, 39, who had bounced from a used car lot to a security company to nothing in particular, and who in a Facebook photo from 4 months earlier was leaning against the front of a white Transit with a clipboard and a ball cap. Under Emerson's name, Bridger wrote the word Bishop because Emerson's middle name was Bishop, after Camilla's father, and he had gone by it his whole life outside the family, and a 7-year-old who heard the driver called Bishop by other adults would never in 100 years connect that man to Uncle M. Above Camilla, a lineup, Dr. Sebastian Vaught, P.I., Charlotte. Then a line further up, thin and dotted, because Bridger did not know it yet, Ardenwell Therapeutics, sponsor, pays. Off to the side, a box, Barnett Hatterley, M.D., Pediatrics, Tarleton, writes the diagnosis that makes a healthy child eligible. And at the bottom, in the corner of the page, one name with a question mark next to it, which is where every one of these things has always turned. Miss Tilly does the arm tape, the only one who does it good. Because that is the rule. Bridger had learned it in 3 countries, and he had never once seen it fail. Every operation like this runs on a small number of people who profit, and a much larger number of people who just work there. And somewhere in that larger group, there is always at least one person who goes home at night and cannot get comfortable. You do not find them by being clever. You find them by asking a child which adult is kind. Tilly Brannigan was 23 years old. She had an associate's degree in medical assisting from the community college in Sanford, a phlebotomy certification, $11,000 of debt, and a job that paid $24 an hour, which in that county, in that year, was a very good job. She had worked at Site 14 for 19 months. She lived in an apartment complex on the edge of Tarleton with a boyfriend who drove for a beer distributor and a cat named Pancake. Bridger did not approach her at work. He did not approach her at home. Both of those are ways of telling a person that you have been watching them, and a person who has been watched does not talk, they run. He approached her at the 24-hour laundromat on Bragg Boulevard, where she did her wash, because a laundromat is public, well-lit, has 2 exits, and is full of the specific boredom that makes strangers talk to each other. The first night he sat 2 machines down with a duffel of his own clothes, read a paperback for 35 minutes, and said nothing to her at all. The second night he mentioned that the dryer on the end ate quarters. She said she knew. That was the entire conversation. The third night he brought 2 coffees from the gas station and set one on the folding table without comment, and when she said, "You don't have to do that," he said, "I'm aware," and went back to his book, and Tilly Brannigan laughed for the first time. The fourth night was the 12th day. He said, "Can I ask you something that's going to be strange?" "That's a bad start." "It is." He put the book down. "My name is Bridger Ketterman. 2 weeks ago my daughter told me that when I deploy, her grandmother puts her in a white van and drives her 60 miles into the woods to a gray building, and that a woman named Miss Tilly does the tape on her arm because she's the only one who does it good." He watched her face. He was very good at watching faces, and he had thought about this moment for 9 days, and it still did not go the way he had planned, because Tilly Brannigan did not go pale and she did not run. She put both hands flat on the folding table, and she started to cry, and she said, "Is she 0022? And Bridger Ketterman, who had not been afraid at any point since the bathroom floor, felt the temperature drop out of the room. "Why do you know that number?" he said. "Because I've been trying to figure out how to find her dad for 4 months, said Tilly, "and everybody told me he was overseas." They talked in the cab of Holland's truck in the laundromat parking lot for 2 hours and 40 minutes with the windows down, and Bridger recorded all of it with her written permission on a page torn out of his notebook, and what Tilly Brannigan told him was not what he expected, and it was worse. He had gone in braced for the obvious horror. He had spent 12 days getting ready to hear that they were putting an untested drug into 31 children's lungs and writing down what happened. "No," Tilly said. "That's the thing. That's the whole thing. Nobody's dosing anybody." "Say that again." "The study drug never goes in." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "It comes in a sealed carton from the sponsor every 4 weeks. Temperature logged, sealed, chain of custody. The whole thing. Dr. Vought's the only one with the key to the cabinet. And every visit day we log out 31 doses, and we sign for 31 doses, and at the end of the day, 31 nebules go in the sharps bin in the back room, and I've watched him do it since my 3rd month." Bridger sat very still. "Then what are the children for?" "For being real." And she explained it, in the flat, exhausted voice of a person who has explained it to herself in her car about 600 times. A pharmaceutical company that wants to sell a drug for children has to prove it works in children. That is the law, and it is a good law, and it is also the slowest, most miserable part of drug development, because parents don't want to enroll their kids, and the kids who do enroll drop out, and every month of delay is money the company is not making. So the company hires a contract research organization, and it pays that organization per subject. Northrail's contract with Ardenwell Therapeutics paid $41,000 for every subject who completed all 8 visits of Protocol ARD 114-3, plus a milestone payment for hitting enrollment targets ahead of schedule. Running the study honestly would have meant finding 31 genuinely asthmatic children in a rural county, keeping them enrolled for 11 months, and reporting whatever the data actually showed, including the kids who got worse, including the dropouts. Fabricating it was cheaper, but you cannot fabricate a clinical trial out of nothing, because sponsors audit and regulators inspect, and the first thing an auditor does is pull a subject file and ask to see the source documents, the signed consent, the screening physical, the photograph of the subject at the visit, the spirometry printout with a timestamp, the lab requisition with a barcode, the bracelet number. "You can't invent a child," Tilly said. "You can invent a number. You can't invent a child." So they didn't. They got real children, real bracelets, real photographs on the tape line by the door, real spirometry with the child actually blowing into the tube for the count of 6, real blood, drawn from a real arm, by a real certified phlebotomist, and sent to a real central lab under a real requisition. Everything in the file that could be checked was true. Everything that mattered was invented. The spirometry numbers got corrected in the electronic system by a coordinator with edit rights. That was Camilla. Because a healthy child blowing into a spirometer produces the numbers of a healthy child, and a study of asthma medication requires the numbers of a sick child getting better. The daily symptom diaries that parents were supposed to fill out were filled out in the back office in 4 different pens. The adverse event log was empty in 11 months, which is statistically impossible in a pediatric population, and which no one had flagged, because an empty adverse event log is exactly what a sponsor with a drug it needs to launch wants to see. "They're not testing the drug on kids," Bridger said slowly. "They're using kids to make it look like they tested the drug." "Yeah. And then Ardenwell takes that data to the FDA." "Yeah? And a doctor somewhere prescribes it to an actual asthmatic 6-year-old on the strength of a study that never happened." Tilly Brannigan looked out the windshield at the laundromat sign. "That's the part I can't sleep about," she said. "Everybody thinks the kids in the van are the victims. There's 100,000 kids who are the victims, and none of them have been born yet." He asked her the question he had been holding for 2 hours. Why military families? And she told him, and it was the single most cynical thing Bridger Ketterman ever heard in his life, and it was delivered as a piece of ordinary professional common sense, the way you'd explain why you buy a certain brand of tire. Because your records are perfect. Every dependent child of an active duty service member has an unbroken, centralized, digitized medical history from birth. Every immunization, every ear infection, every well child visit, every height and weight, all in one system, all verifiable, all instantly available to a site that gets consent. In the civilian world, a study site has to chase paper records across 4 pediatric practices and 2 states, and half of it is missing. Baseline data is the hardest thing to get, and the easiest thing for an auditor to check, Tilly said. Military kids come with a perfect baseline. Mrs. Belknap said it in a staff meeting once. She said, and here Tilly's voice did something ugly. She said, "These are the best documented children in America." Bridger did not say anything for a while. "And the deployment," he said finally. "That's the other half." Tilly nodded. "The window. When a parent deploys, the other parent is drowning, and there's a legal guardian already named on a federal form with medical consent authority. 9 months where nobody's checking. Enrollment closes, all 8 visits happen, subject completes, files locked, money's paid. By the time you come home, it's finished, and your kid's got a paper bracelet in a drawer and thinks she went to the doctor a lot. And when the deployed parent asks questions?" Tilly looked at him. "You're the first one who ever has," she said. Then she told him about Nella. Nella Crisp was 5 years old, subject 14-0009. Her father was a staff sergeant in a transportation company, and her mother, Linnea, worked nights at a distribution center in Sanford, and her grandmother had signed her on to the study in the fall. Nella was actually sick, not asthma. Nella had been getting tired. Nella had been getting winded on the stairs, and had a color her mother described as gray around the mouth, and her grandmother, who had heard from Camilla Belknap that the study included a full pediatric workup at no cost, and they pay you, had thought she was doing something smart. At visit 3 in February, Nella's oxygen saturation was recorded on the source worksheet in Tilly's own handwriting as 89%. 89% in a 5-year-old at rest is not a data point. It is an emergency. It is a child who goes to a hospital that hour. "I told the coordinator," Tilly said. "I told Mrs. Belknap. I said this kid needs to go to Cape Fear right now." "What did she say?" "She said the pulse ox on cart 2 had been throwing bad reads all week." Tilly's hands were shaking. She took the worksheet. She wrote 98 on the ECRF. And she said, and I remember this exactly, she said, "Tilly, if we log a serious adverse event, we get a site inspection, and everybody's file gets pulled, and that is not going to help this little girl." Nella Crisp was found unresponsive in her bed on the 9th of March. The cause of death on the certificate was listed as sudden cardiac arrhythmia, natural. It was signed by Barnett Hatterley, MD, the same pediatrician whose letterhead had given Emberly Ketterman 2 years of asthma she never had. Nella had an undiagnosed congenital heart defect that a chest film and an echo would have caught in an afternoon. The screening physical for protocol ARD 114-3 required a cardiovascular examination. Dr. Hatterley had performed 31 of them in a single Saturday in a strip mall office at $400 each, and had, according to Tilly, listened to exactly none of their hearts. The van kept running. Site 14 hit its enrollment milestone 11 days later. Somebody made a spreadsheet where Nella Crisp's subject line was marked "withdrawn, lost to follow-up." "I kept everything," Tilly said. Bridger turned his head. "Say that again." "I kept everything." She was crying again, and also, for the first time, sitting up straight. "Every source worksheet I ever wrote in my own hand before she changed it. 19 months. I scanned them on my phone at the end of the day in the bathroom, and I put them in a folder. Because the day I told her about Nella's SAT, I went home and I looked at my ceiling all night, and I thought, one day somebody is going to come and ask me, and I am not going to be the girl who says I didn't know." She looked at him. "Nobody ever came," she said. "For 4 months, nobody ever came." "Somebody came," Bridger said. The obvious move at that point was a raid. Bridger had a witness, 19 months of contemporaneous source documents, photographs of 9 vans, and a dead 5-year-old. He could have handed all of it to the county sheriff on Wednesday morning and watched deputies put tape across the door of Site 14 by Friday. He sat in the motel room with the folder open on the bed and ran the loud plan all the way to the end again, and this time it failed in a way that made him put his head in his hands. Because Site 14 was one of 14. If you raid a site, you seize a site. Northrail's lawyers issue a statement about an isolated coordinator acting outside protocol. Camilla Belknap, 64, gracious, cardigan, no record, a decade of volunteer work with military families, becomes a tragic rogue employee, and she gets 18 months and serves 9. Dr. Sebastian Vaught issues a statement expressing shock. Ardenwell announces that it takes data integrity extremely seriously, quarantines Site 14's data, files the application anyway on the other 13 sites, and the drug gets approved, and the thing Tilly Brannigan actually cannot sleep about happens exactly on schedule. You do not fix a place by arresting the man in front of you. You fix it by making it impossible for the structure above him to pretend he was an accident. That is not a moral position. It's a job description. If you want a village to change, you do not hand the mayor a list of complaints. You get everyone who has been hurt into one room at the same time, in front of the one person with the power and the motive to act, and you make it cheaper for that person to do the right thing than to bury it. He called Kwame Ajay on the 13th day. They had spent 7 months together in a 2-room compound where Ajay was the intel sergeant and Bridger ran the meetings. Ajay had gotten out 4 years ago and gone to work for the Food and Drug Administration's Office of Criminal Investigations, a small federal agency of about 230 special agents that almost nobody has ever heard of, and that exists to put people in prison for exactly this. Bridger talked for 11 minutes. Ajay did not interrupt once. Then Ajay said, "Say the enrollment number again." 31. And the completed subject payment. 41,000. There was a silence. "Ketterman, I want to be very careful here," Ajay said. "Do you understand that what you just described is not a fraud case? It's a fraud case, a false statements case, a wire fraud case, a case about a dead child, and, if that data goes into a new drug application, an offense that carries a number I don't want to say on the phone. So take it. I will take it, but I need it built right, and that's going to take me longer than you want, and you are going to have to do something you're going to hate." "What?" "You're going to have to let the van keep coming." That was the hardest thing anyone asked Bridger Ketterman to do in the whole 19 days, and he thought about it for the length of one breath, because he had already known it was coming. "Not with my kid," he said. "With your kid," Ajay said, "or the coordinator smells it in a week, and every hard drive in that building goes in a lake." So here is what a father did. Emberly Ketterman rode in that van 2 more times, on the 29th and on the 6th. Both times, in the left shoe of her light-up sneakers, under the insole, there was a flat gray disc about the size of a poker chip, and both times her father sat in a Malibu on the shoulder of a logging road, 4 miles from Sardis Gap, watching a dot move across a map on a laptop. And both times, when she got home and told her mother about the beanbag room, there was a woman's voice in her ear the whole day that Bridger could hear, because the second thing in Ember's shoe was a microphone, and every hour of it was recorded under a federal warrant signed by a magistrate judge in the Eastern District of North Carolina on the 17th. He listened to 240 minutes of his daughter being kind to people who were using her. He also listened, on the 6th, at 11:04 in the morning, to the 40 seconds that ended the whole thing. Camilla Belknap had taken Ember aside near the sign-in table because Ember had asked, out loud, in a room, when her daddy was coming home. "Ember, look at me. What do we say about daddy? That he's watching. That's right. He has to watch every second because there's people over there who want to hurt him. And do you know what happens to a soldier who's thinking about home instead of watching? He doesn't see it coming. He doesn't see it coming. So when he calls, we're happy, and we don't tell him about our Saturdays, because our Saturdays are ours. If you tell him, he stops watching. And if he stops watching, sweetheart, he dies over there, and it will be because of you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Grandma." "Good girl. Go get a juice." Bridger Ketterman sat in a rental car on a logging road with headphones on and did not move for a very long time. Then he wrote one sentence in his notebook, and it was not a plan or an assumption or a question. She rehearsed it. Meanwhile, Ajay was doing the part nobody makes movies about, which was paper. Grand jury subpoenas to Northrail's data vendor for the audit trail of the electronic case report forms. Every edit, every user ID, every timestamp, which is a thing electronic systems keep automatically and which nobody at Site 14 had apparently ever thought about. A subpoena to the central lab for the specimen chain of custody. A subpoena to Ardenwell for the contract, the payment schedule, and the monitoring reports. And that last subpoena is where the case stopped being a case and became a trap because it put a piece of paper in front of a woman named Perrine Halcombe. Perrine Halcombe was Ardenwell's vice president of clinical operations. She was 47, she had a doctorate in pharmacology, and she had spent 2.5 years of her life on ARD-114 because it was, genuinely, a good drug for a real disease that real children have. She got the subpoena on a Thursday. She read it twice. Then she pulled Site 14's enrollment metrics and looked at them the way a person looks at a bank statement they have been avoiding. A rural site with a population base of 90,000 people that had enrolled 31 pediatric asthma subjects in 5 months, when her best academic site in Philadelphia had managed 19 in a year, with a 0% dropout rate and an empty adverse event log. She had seen those numbers before. She had approved a bonus payment on them in April. She had put a slide about Site 14 in a board presentation with the word exemplary on it. Perrine Halcombe spent one night deciding whether she was going to be the villain of this story. And to her permanent credit, she decided she was not. She called the number on the subpoena at 7:40 the next morning, and by that afternoon, she was in a conference room with 3 federal agents and a lawyer, and Kwame Ajay asked her one question. "Under your contract, can you conduct a 4-cause audit of a site without notice? With 24 hours notice? Or without, if I have reason to believe subject safety is at risk?" "Ma'am," Ajay said, "how much notice would it take you to be standing in the lobby of Site 14 at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 20th, with your monitors, your quality team, and every document that Site has ever generated?" Perrine Halcombe looked at him. "None," she said. The 20th was visit 6, all 31 subjects, 9 vans. And here is the last piece, the one Bridger did not understand until 3 days before it happened, when Tilly Brannigan sent him a photograph of a single page at 11 at night with no message attached. It was a printed email from Camilla Belknap to Dr. Sebastian Vaught, dated the 11th of February, 3 days before Darcy signed Ember's consent form. "Sebastian, the Q1 sponsor visit. I share your concern about the enrollment optics. I'd suggest we address it directly, rather than defensively. I intend to enroll my own granddaughter, age 7, TRICARE, clean baseline, at 14. No auditor in the world questions the integrity of a coordinator who has put her own grandchild in the study. It is the cheapest insurance we will ever buy. CB. Emberly Ketterman was not in that van because she was sick. She was not in it because they needed one more head, or because $41,000 is $41,000. She was in it because her grandmother had gone looking for a shield and had found one in her own house. and had put a paper bracelet on it. Bridger read that email 11 times. Then he put the phone down on the motel bedspread and looked at the ceiling for a while, the way Tilly had, and then he called Ajay. "I want the guardians in the room," he said. "That's not how a federal— Kwame. I want all 31 families in that lobby on the 20th. "Why?" "Because otherwise it's a press release," Bridger said, "and press releases are how these people survive. If it's just agents and boxes, North Rail writes a statement about a rogue coordinator and everybody goes home. If it's the mothers, if Linnea Crisp is standing there when they walk Camilla Belknap out, then it isn't a paperwork story anymore. Then it's the thing that actually happened." There was a long pause on the line. "You know what you're describing," Ajay said. "You're running a key leader engagement on your own mother-in-law." "I'm running one on the whole county," Bridger said. On the 19th, 31 phone calls went out from a church fellowship hall in Tarleton. Not from a federal agent, from Linnea Crisp, whose daughter was dead, and Tamika Broadwater, a Navy corpsman's wife whose son had been in the 4th van for 6 months, and Holland Ketterman, who had waited until Tuesday and then not asked a single question for 18 days after that. They did not say the word investigation. They said, "I'm the mother of a child in the Sardis Gap study. Something is wrong with it. There is a meeting tomorrow morning at 9 at the site and you should be there, and bring somebody with you." 26 of the 31 came. The 20th was a Thursday in the second week of June, and it started the way every visit day started. 9 white transits went out at first light along 9 routes across 3 counties. Emerson Bishop Belknap counted children onto the 4th van with a pen. Camilla Belknap arrived at Site 14 at 07:15 in a cardigan the color of eggshell, unlocked the annex, made coffee, and set out 31 paper bracelets in a row on the sign-in table in numerical order. At 07:52, a black Suburban and 2 sedans came up Sardis Gap Road and parked in the gravel lot, and Perrine Halcomb got out of the first one with a rolling case, 5 monitors from Ardenwell's quality organization, and a laminated badge, and walked in the glass door and said the 4 words that end a clinical site. "For cause audit, now." Dr. Sebastian Vaught arrived from Charlotte at 08:36, having been telephoned by a panicking Camilla, and made the single worst decision of his professional life, which was to come. At 08:51, the vans started coming back up the gravel road with the children, and behind them, in a line, came 26 other vehicles, pickup trucks and minivans and a Corolla with a bad muffler and a church bus from Tarleton with 14 people on it, and they filled the gravel lot and then the shoulder of the road and then the grass. And mothers and fathers and grandparents got out and stood in the parking lot of a converted cold storage building in the middle of Ossipee National Forest, and nobody had told Camilla Belknap that this was going to happen. Bridger Ketterman was standing at the back of the lot in jeans and a t-shirt with his sister on one side of him and his daughter's hand in his. He had told Ember that morning, sitting on the motel bed, in words a 7-year-old could hold, that he had never gotten on the plane, that he had stayed because she told him the truth, that the visits were not doctor visits, and were going to stop today, that some grown-ups were going to be in trouble, and none of it was her fault, and that she had been right and brave, and everything after this was his job, not hers. She had asked one question, "Is Grandma going to be mad at me?" "She's going to say she is," Bridger said. "She's going to say a lot of things, and every single one of them is about her. And none of them are about you." At 09:04, with the lobby full and the parking lot fuller, Camilla Belknap did what she had always done, which was to take control of a room. She came out the glass door with her hands up in a warm, calming gesture, and her voice pitched to Carrie, and she started to speak. She said that there had obviously been a misunderstanding. She said that she had devoted her life to military families, that some of the people standing here had received Christmas dinners from her, that Homefront Bridge had walked beside them through the hardest seasons of their lives, and that she would not, she said this twice, she would not stand here and be accused by people she had served. She was very good. Half the lot went quiet. A woman near the front started to cry, and it was not clear whose side the crying was on. And Bridger, watching, understood that if this had been only agents and boxes, Camilla Belknap would have talked her way to a different sentence. Then Kwame Ajay, standing on the top step in a windbreaker with 3 letters on it, said, "Ma'am, I'd stop," and held up a phone. And Camilla Belknap's own voice came out of a small speaker into a gravel lot in a national forest, in front of 26 families and 11 of her own staff and the vice president of clinical operations of Ardenwell Therapeutics. "If you tell him, he stops watching. And if he stops watching, sweetheart, he dies over there, and it will be because of you. Do you understand?" "Yes, Grandma." 40 seconds. He played it twice. The second time, somebody in the middle of the lot made a sound that Bridger said afterward he had only ever heard in one other place in his life. Camilla Belknap did not say anything else. There was nothing to say. Her mouth moved once, and then she looked out over the crowd and found her son-in-law at the very back, standing in a t-shirt with a child's hand in his, in a country she had promised him he would not come home from. He did not shout anything. He did not raise a hand. He looked at her for about 4 seconds, and then he crouched down and asked Ember if she wanted to go get breakfast, and they walked to the truck and left before the handcuffs came out, because he had decided a long time before that his daughter was not going to have that picture in her head for the next 60 years. The indictment came down 11 weeks later and ran to 91 counts. Camilla Belknap pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, wire fraud, falsification of records in a federal investigation, and making false statements in a matter within the jurisdiction of a federal agency. The government's sentencing memorandum quoted the 40 seconds. She got 14 years. Dr. Sebastian Vaught went to trial, which his attorney advised against, and was convicted on 63 counts. Because the fabricated data had been transmitted for inclusion in a federal drug application, and because a jury in Raleigh listened to 4 days of testimony about a 5-year-old named Nella Crisp, whose 98% oxygen saturation had been typed over an 89, he got 22 years and the forfeiture of everything he owned. Dr. Barnett Hatterley surrendered his medical license, pleaded to false statements and involuntary manslaughter, and got 9 years. Emerson Bishop Belknap got 51 months. Northrail Clinical Partners ceased to exist. All 14 of its sites were audited. 6 had the same pattern. 41 people were charged across 4 states. Ardenwell withdrew the ARD-114 pediatric application, ran the study again over 3 years at academic centers with independent monitoring, and got it approved on real data. Perrine Halcombe testified for the government for 2 days, did not get a bonus that year, and kept her job, which in that industry, for what she did, was not nothing. Darcy Ketterman pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy and got 30 months. She had signed 22 pages and taken $9,600 across 5 months. At her sentencing, she said she had not known what it was, and the judge, who had read the text messages, said, "You knew enough to hide the deposits from a man in a war zone," and gave her the high end. Tilly Brannigan was never charged. She testified in 2 trials. She now works as a clinical research auditor for a hospital system in Durham, which is to say she is paid to be the person she was in that bathroom with her phone, and she is extremely good at it. Bridger Ketterman deployed on the follow-on chalk, 19 days late, and came home 9 months later. He got sole legal and physical custody in a hearing that lasted 11 minutes. Holland had Ember the whole time, and by the end of it the 2 of them had a routine involving pancakes on Sunday that Bridger was not allowed to alter. 2 years later, the building at 4188 Sardis Gap Road opened again. Ardenwell's civil settlement had funded it as part of a consent agreement, and the sign over the glass door, mounted level and square, professionally printed, weather-resistant, says, "Nella Crisp Children's Clinic Pediatric Care. No appointment necessary. Everybody gets seen." Linnea Crisp is on the board. So is a retired sergeant first class who does not say much at the meetings and who insisted, over some objection, that the wall of the waiting room be painted with a map of the county, a real one, with every road on it. Emberly Ketterman is 12 now. She is on a swim team. She does not remember the beanbag room very well, which her father counts as the single best outcome of his entire career. She does remember the bathroom floor. She brought it up once, at 13, in the truck, out of nowhere, and asked her dad if she had done the right thing, telling him. And Bridger Ketterman, who had spent 11 years learning how to find the true map of a place, told his daughter the truest thing he knew, which was that she had not just done the right thing, She had done the only thing that ever works. She had said the sentence out loud. So, Nathan again. I've told a lot of stories on this channel about people who won by hitting harder. This one's different, and I think it's the one I'd want my own family to hear. Because look at what actually saved those 31 kids. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't a man with a gun. It was a 7-year-old who decided, on a bathroom floor, that a hard sentence was worth saying out loud. And then a father who did the one thing almost nobody does, which is believe a child completely, and then move slowly anyway. That second part is the hard part. Every instinct Bridger had was screaming at him to kick that door in Wednesday night. And if he had, Camilla walks with 18 months, Vought never gets touched, 6 other sites keep running, and a bad drug application goes to the FDA on invented numbers. His anger would have felt incredible for about 4 hours and cost 100,000 kids he'll never meet. There's a thing that shows up in this story that I want you to actually keep. Camilla Belknap's real weapon was never the van. It was the sentence she planted in a child. If you tell, something terrible happens, and it'll be your fault. That is the load-bearing beam of every operation like this, and it works on adults just as well as kids. If somebody in your life has convinced you that speaking will cause a catastrophe, a boss, a partner, an in-law, anybody, I want you to notice that they built that. Nobody who loves you makes your silence a safety requirement. And the other one, the one that got Bridger there, he'd spent his whole career mapping other people's towns and had never once mapped his own kitchen. Ask yourself who has a key to your house. Ask yourself whose name is on the form you signed in a hallway while somebody said next every 90 seconds. It's not paranoia. It's just reading the second map, the true one. If this one got you, hit that like, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments, what's the one question you're going to go ask about your own house this week? I read them. See you in the next one.